Funding for the Nashville podcast comes from the neurosurgeons of the Howell Allen Clinic, national leaders in brain and spine surgery, specializing in laser brain tumor surgery and robotic spine surgery. The Howell Allen Clinic. Your life is our life's work.
This is the Nashvillager podcast. It's August 14th, 2026. On this day in 1938, America's last public execution by hanging happened in Owensboro, Kentucky, on the banks of the Ohio River. Thousands of people showed up to watch. A photo taken on that day shows the wooden gallows stand surrounded in every direction by people pressed tightly together, all eyes facing the temporary structure where a young black man is about to be put to death. That man was named Rainey Bethea. He was 20 years old. When his employer, a 70-year-old woman named Licia Edwards, was found murdered, the court of public opinion quickly assumed he had to have been the one who did it, even though the evidence against him was quite flimsy. People pressed officials to rush through the trial and carry out a speedy execution. One editorial in a local paper said, quote, "He was without mercy for his defenseless victim. Why should he be shown the slightest degree of mercy? The quicker such a beast is destroyed, the better it will be." Prosecutors actually chose not to seek a murder conviction because the punishment would be what was considered to be the most modern form of execution, the electric chair. Instead, they used a loophole in Kentucky law of the time. Rape was also a capital offense, but under an older statute that called for death by hanging. The execution effectively amounted to a government-sponsored lynching. And outside of Owensboro, that's how most press reported on the event, with articles that pointed out the shockingly callous details that accompany a public execution, like the way that vendors sold refreshments to the crush of people who had gathered outside on that hot August day. It became an embarrassment to the town, and it became a symbol for the kind of execution that Americans wanted to put in their past. That's why it was the last of its kind. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with context and backstory from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Yesterday morning, the state of Tennessee executed a man named Daryl Hines by lethal injection, and we'll have more about what happened later in this episode. Back in May, the state attempted and failed to do the same to a man named Tony Carruthers. And next month, Krista Pike, the only woman on Tennessee's death row, is scheduled for execution. Now, Pike has made an unusual request. Her attorneys say she would rather die by hanging than by lethal injection. Hanging was the default method of execution for the first century or so of Tennessee's existence as a state. And those hangings were not unlike Rainey Bethea's, carried out in public by local officials in the same county where the person was convicted of the crime. And for what it's worth, several convictions qualified for the death penalty. It wasn't just for murder. In 1913, the state took over the job of carrying out executions, and the method changed. Instead of the noose, the tool of choice was the electric chair. In that era, there was a real ebb and flow to how often they happened. In the 1930s, the state carried out nearly 50 capital punishments. After that, things slowed down a lot. In 1960, a man convicted of rape was put to death. For the next dozen years, there were none. And then in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court declared capital punishment unconstitutional. It found that states carried out those penalties in a way that was arbitrary and discriminatory. 4 years later, another ruling reopened the door, but with a new emphasis on making sure that the death penalty was not handed out lightly. There was also an increased focus on the fact that the constitutional ban on cruel and unusual punishment extends to execution, because how we choose to carry out punishment, even the ultimate punishment, reflects as much on us as a society as it does on the nature of the crime at hand or the person identified as the criminal. Looking at things through that lens, Tennessee legislators reworked the state's death penalty law. The version they adopted in 1978 is basically what's still in place today. The electric chair was still used, but there was a real question of whether that was the best way to do things in order to avoid cruelty. A couple of lawsuits that went all the way up to the state Supreme Court led to a judicial review of the system as a whole. And as a result of that process, in 1998, the law was adjusted to make lethal injection the default method for killing people convicted of capital crimes. Now, the argument for lethal injection is that it is clinical and supposedly painless. That's the theory anyway. whether that's actually how things really go, has come under pretty intense scrutiny. Tennessee used to use a 3-drug protocol. Then some autopsies suggested that protocol does not work as advertised. Those findings suggest people were actually conscious and in great discomfort, but unable to display what they feel. And then there are the cases where the drugs clearly didn't work as expected, like the 2014 execution in Arizona, where it took nearly 2 hours for a man to die. Then in 2022, Governor Bill Lee halted the execution schedule over concerns that the people carrying out executions weren't going through the proper steps to make sure the drugs were at proper strength, hadn't expired, and were still sterile. A new, more simplified protocol was adopted. Executions resumed last year. But if anything, the level of questioning about how humane lethal injection can be has only intensified with each person taken from death row to the actual death chamber. And so, here we are. One botched attempted execution in our recent past, just one day out from a lethal injection that did go through, and a new round of legal battles over Krista Pikes set to fill the next 6 weeks or so. In just a few minutes, we'll hear from WPLN's Catherine Sweeney, who served as a media witness to Daryl Hines' execution. That's coming up after the newscast.
Funding for the Nashville podcast comes from the neurosurgeons of the Howell Allen Clinic, national leaders in brain and spine surgery, specializing in laser brain tumor surgery and robotic spine surgery. The Howell Allen Clinic. Your life is our life's work.
Way back in 1952, the bronze Mercury statue atop Union Station took a tumble. There's been a replacement up there for the past 30 years, and that prompted the question,
the original, I'm wondering where it could be.
Curious Nashville chases down the old bronze with some twists and turns along the way. Learn more and ask your question at wpln.org/curious.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee's Department of Correction executed Anthony Daryl Hines yesterday morning, 4 decades after his conviction for the murder of Catherine Jean Jenkins. Jenkins was a maid at a Kingston Springs motel where Hines fatally stabbed her in March 1985. After the lethal injection, Melissa Jenkins spoke about the void left by her mother's murder.
One senseless act not only took her life, but forever changed the lives of the many family members and friends who were robbed of the chance to hug her, laugh with her, hear her stories, or see her beautiful smile again.
Tennessee's lethal injection protocol has faced persistent criticism, which was amplified by the botched execution of Tony Carruthers in May. Metro Nashville police detectives are investigating an officer-involved shooting Wednesday in which no one was hit and a suspect was apprehended. A Cheatham County deputy received word a man who is wanted on outstanding warrants was at Eddie's Market near Pegram. When the officer approached the man's Jeep, Metro police say the suspect turned the wheel toward the deputy and accelerated. The deputy ended up shooting one of the Jeep's tires. The man drove off, but with the tire damage, stopped a short drive away and was caught by the pursuing deputy. Additional charges are now expected in Davidson County. President Trump's mass deportations could cost you nearly $2,000 by 2028. The cost breakdown per taxpayer comes from a new online calculator created by the Economic Policy Institute, a think tank based in D.C. Their online tool also estimates that the total cost to all U.S. taxpayers could reach nearly $270 billion over the course of Trump's second term. The calculator estimates how much taxpayers in each state, county, and city would need to contribute toward the federal government's mass deportation efforts. According to the calculator, the immigration crackdown is enough to cover the salaries of more than 21,000 firefighters, fund Medicaid health for 246,000 patients, or hire nearly 19,000 teachers in Tennessee. The group says the estimated $270 billion figure could go higher if Congress approves additional funding through other avenues. Some Republican state lawmakers are considering a special legislative session to address rising property taxes amid concern from Lower Broadway business owners. Axios reports that House Speaker Cameron Sexton and State Senator Jack Johnson have spoken with Governor Bill Lee about the possibility of addressing the issue. Downtown Honky Tonk owners have sounded the alarm about skyrocketing property tax bills after last year's appraisal saw some values increase by as much as 400%. At the same time, the mayor approved a tax rate that represented an average 26% tax increase for property owners. A 2023 study has shown that Nashville has one of the lower effective property tax rates among cities of a similar size nationwide. It's unclear what regulations the State House would pursue in a legislative session. Lawmakers did consider various property tax caps this past session, but none passed. State law gives property tax decision-making power to local governments, so legislation addressing a Nashville-specific problem could be difficult to develop. A Nashville youth sports league is under investigation. A complaint alleges leaders failed to account for funds raised during a fund drive 2 years ago. The group East Nashville Athletics generated more than $100,000 for specific upgrades at Shelby Park, which is owned by Metro Nashville Parks Department. But a formal complaint filed with the state attorney general's office alleges that the group failed to fully account for the money. The organization sent donors a list of where the contributions were earmarked, such as renovations to the infield and batting cages, a new scoreboard, and storage sheds. The group also claimed it had a landlord-tenant relationship with Metro Parks. However, a spokesperson with Metro Parks says that the relationship is limited to maintenance and programming. That's not what the fundraising materials suggest. Although some improvements were made, the complaint says many of the promised projects do not appear complete. East Nashville Athletics was asked to produce records dating back 3 years to show how the donor money was spent. The group missed an initial deadline. The Attorney General's office is giving ENA until the end of August. Attorneys for the organization say they are fully cooperating with the investigation. Well, Nashville's state-appointed airport authority is discussing deals to buy more land for the facility. The Nashville Business Journal reports 2 purchases of property totaling 33 acres were on the agenda for a committee meeting this week. Documents indicate the airport might also buy another 10 acres adjacent to the current facility. Why buy more land? Because airport officials want to have nonstop flights to Asia. Our current runways aren't long enough for the large planes that are used for such long flights. The documents also indicate possible expansion at Nashville's general aviation facility. Potential deals in the works to buy 25 acres adjacent to the John C. Toon Airport. That land currently belongs to Tennessee State University. Well, they're cute and cuddly and all over social media. And because a lot goes into keeping these shaggy beasts cool in the summer, there's not many of them in Tennessee. But this year, for the first time in the history of the Wilson County Tennessee State Fair, the Scottish Highland cow is getting their very own show and competition. Ample prep goes into any livestock show, but for the Highland, a glow-up includes tail adhesive, a blow dryer, and a considerable amount of hairspray. Sarah Fast of Faster Pasture says outer beauty doesn't always mean a blue ribbon. Inner quality can make a difference.
Genetics has a big part to do with it, but sometimes you just have a cow that comes out that has the it factor. And from the moment it's born, you love it a little more. And some cows just have the it factor.
The Wilson County Tennessee State Fair opened Thursday and runs through August 22nd. You can see the Scottish Highland Cow Show on Tuesday, August 18th at 6 p.m. Well, a drug-resistant fungus has infected more than 250 Tennesseans so far this year, according to state data. That's a higher rate of Candida auris in the past few years. Michigan and Texas have higher case counts. It's a yeast that spreads through skin infections and surfaces. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says once the fungus enters the body, it can infect several bodily systems, including the bloodstream. There's not a universal list of symptoms, but it can cause some like chills, fever, and extreme fatigue. The agency says people who've been hospitalized face a greater risk of contracting it, especially if they're using feeding tubes, breathing tubes, or catheters in the heart and urinary tract. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Well, as you've heard throughout today's episode, the execution of Daryl Hines has been a significant event this week. And with more executions scheduled, legal challenges are still playing out. This includes one case about the secrecy of Tennessee's process. WPLN's Catherine Sweeney was among media witnesses and recounted what she saw with News Director Tony Gonzalez.
Catherine, you've now observed 4 executions, but what is the reason that journalists are even in that room?
So there are not a lot of public accounts of how the executions go. We need people in there who don't have an agenda, who can just look at what's happening and explain it in detail for people to have on record. There are a lot of things that can go wrong during an execution, and there aren't really a lot of unbiased or neutral observers other than journalists. So you have defense attorneys watching who are obviously in the corner of the people being executed, or you have people who work for the prison system who are obviously in the corner of the state. We're the only ones in there who are neutral.
So we hear a lot about the state's protocol for carrying out an execution. So, it's a detailed step-by-step process. But what limitations are there for you as a witness in watching how closely the protocol is followed?
Part of being a witness is you study the protocol. And that is step by step what's supposed to happen, what happens at 10 a.m. They get taken out of their cell. Then they're strapped to a gurney. They are then brought to the death chamber. There are curtains hanging over the window between the media witness bay and the death chamber. And those stay closed until the IV lines are established. If you follow anything about lethal injection, you know that placing those IVs can be very difficult. There are executions canceled. There are executions that do go through but are very violent. And a lot of it has to do with getting those lines placed. If the IV team fails to place those lines, a doctor has to go in and place one in a deeper vein. It's a quasi-surgical procedure. All of that can become really important. In the last execution attempt of Tony Carruthers, that's where it all fell apart, and the curtains were closed the entire time.
For this latest execution, the legal team had concerns in advance, like about the health conditions of Hines and how the staff would prepare. How were you able to observe those concerns in particular?
I basically couldn't. So a lot of the concerns had to do with his left side. Hines had a series of strokes leading up to his execution that left him paralyzed on the left side. Also, because of the strokes, his hand and his arm were both clenched in this strange position, and they were going to have to straighten them out somehow. His legal team was really concerned that was going to be painful. Because of the way he was positioned in the death chamber, he was lying perpendicular to our eye line, so we could only see his right side. We couldn't see his left side at all. We had no visibility of his arm.
We do need to say that WPLN has been part of a media coalition that has gone to court to try to increase transparency for the protocol. It is unclear whether anything will officially change. But can you just say what is next for the death penalty in Tennessee this year?
So the next execution is scheduled for September 30th. That will be to execute Krista Gale Pike. She would be the first woman put to death in Tennessee in about 200 years. There are also concerns about whether the IV team will be able to place lines into her arms. She also has health concerns. And then there's one more execution later in the year.
Well, Catherine, thanks for your reporting.
Thank you.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you appreciate this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter, too. Look at Perspective for more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at wpln.org/Nashvillager. And that's it for today. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up next week.
Funding for the Nashvillager podcast comes from the neurosurgeons of the Howell Allen Clinic, national leaders in brain and spine surgery, specializing in laser brain tumor surgery and robotic spine surgery. The Howell Allen Clinic. Your life is our life's work.